US President Joe Biden has met China's Xi Jinping for nearly 4 hours in a virtual summit in the hope of easing increasing tensions. The two presidents have discussed how to strengthen communications and build on mutual respect. But as Sally Ayhan reports, questions remain as to whether they can repair relations.
The relationship between the US and China has a big impact on how the world works. Its two biggest powers are at odds over how people and economies should be governed. But at a virtual summit, their presidents Joe Biden and Xi Jinping tried to find common ground. Biden opened discussions with a nod to their time spent together before they became heads of state, while Xi described his US counterpart as an old friend. But the talks quickly turned to how their long-time relationship could be used to manage a more recent development, the worst economic and military tensions the two countries have seen in decades.
It seems to me our responsibility as leaders of China and the United States is to ensure that the competition between our countries does not veer into conflict, whether intended or unintended. Just simple, straightforward competition. And it seems to me we need to establish some common sense guardrails to be clear and honest where we disagree and work together where interests intersect, especially on vital global issues like climate change.
During UN climate talks in Glasgow, China and the US agreed to join forces to cut global greenhouse gas emissions. But their latest talks revealed how they both remain divorced from one another's policy interests. Biden raised concerns about China's human rights record and anti-democratic practices in Tibet and Hong Kong. He also stated his strong opposition to what he called China's efforts to undermine peace and stability in Taiwan. China had words of its own. Xi told Biden that the US needed to stop using security as an excuse to crack down on Chinese companies. He also accused the US of politicizing trade issues.
China and the US should respect each other, coexist in peace, and achieve win-win cooperation. I would like to work with Mr. President to form a consensus and take action to lead the positive development of China-US relations.
On trade, Biden instead spoke of the need to protect American workers in industries from China's unfair trade practices.
It's a difficult issue for the United States because we have had such a hard line, beginning with Donald Trump, that to go off that line unilaterally would suggest an eager interest for cooperation, something the Biden administration does not want to signal.
The Biden administration would like to see China make concessions, but in absence of that, it seems the White House has settled on finding ways to avoid conflict. Sally Ayhan, TRT World, Washington.
Let's get more on this now with Anna Ashton in Washington, D.C. She's Vice President of Government Affairs at the US-China Business Council. Thank you very much for being with us today. Anna, the meeting went on much longer than planned, and it comes off the back of a surprise agreement on climate change at the COP26 summit. Does it seem like both sides are ready to set aside their differences?
I wouldn't go so far as to say that they're ready to set aside their differences. There are a lot of differences, but it is certainly a good sign that we have seen this uptick and engagement between not only between the two presidents, but between leaders on both sides over the course of the past few months. And this latest meeting was the first face-to-face between the two presidents, albeit a virtual one, but the third conversation in the last 10 months. And it is good that they are talking, given the number of problems that we have.
Right, supply chain constraints, but also rising energy prices are both challenges for both economies. Could there be ground for collaboration?
So the frustrating thing for the U.S. business community in watching this, although it didn't deviate from our expectations, was that economic issues, by and large, were really not discussed. This was a meeting that was primarily focused on strategic issues that might lead to conflict if there is misunderstanding and poor communication. There wasn't really any talk about tariffs, about supply chains, about the things that are making the business and commercial relationships so difficult right now.
Xi said that for the two countries to get along in a new era, the principle of win-win cooperation should be followed. How do you think Taiwan fit into all of this?
Well, I think Taiwan has emerged as a real flashpoint in the relationship and a source of friction. and it is going to be hard for the two countries to navigate this, not only because of differences in views perhaps between our two leaders, but also because it's not just President Biden who runs the US government, right? We have this enormous Congress and many members of Congress who are eager to make a big issue out of Taiwan and in the need to support Taiwan. So we'll have to wait and see. But hopefully, this has helped to at least ensure that there will be communication to avoid conflict.
Right, and lastly, on trade, I mean, trade really between the two countries remains one of the most contentious issues, and Biden has kept in place most of the Trump-era tariffs, and he hasn't really offered any concessions. How can collaboration and peaceful coexistence be ensured in this environment?
Well, so in October, our ambassador, Catherine Tai, who is our US trade representative, emphasized that the Biden administration is going to be focusing right now on enforcing the Phase 1 agreement that was reached in January of 2020. And I think that's a good place for the two governments to start. Certainly, we want to see that agreement be successful, but there are many other issues in the relationship, the bilateral economic relationship, that should be discussed. In the meantime, we hope that the two sides can remember that economic ties between our two countries have traditionally been a source of win-win relations. They have been a stabilizing force in the relationship and a reason for the relationship to have thawed and begun anew in the first place in the 1970s. So it would be good for both governments to leverage that relationship in a positive way.
Anna Ashton, thank you very much for being with us today.